Hello everybody. Today's lecture is going to be on art before history. And that alone begs the question, well, when does history begin? And history begins with writing. Writing seems to emerge from various points of the world around 3200 BC. In the Middle East, particularly in Sumer, we see cuneiform writing. In Egypt, we see hieroglyphics. In northern India, we have the Indus script. The time period we're also looking at today is the Stone Age, where we have two eras. We have the Paleolithic Era and the Neolithic Era. The Paleolithic Era dates from roughly 40,000 BC to 8,000 BC. And when we look at man during this time, he's a hunter-gatherer. People are living in scattered bands of people. The shelters that are built are very, very temporary. And there's no such thing as farming crops or domesticating animals. When we get to the Neolithic Era, which ranges from 8,000 BC to 2000 BC, man changes. The Ice Age has ended, so the world is a little bit more habitable of a place. Humans become more agrarian. Farming begins to take place. We see a domestication of animals. And the shelters that we build, they're much more permanent. We make them out of wood, brick, and stone. Life expectancy, though, it's pretty short. It's still under 40 years old. So I break down this lecture into three different forms of art: painting, sculpture, and architecture. The first section we're going to talk about is painting. And with painting, we see the cave painters really concentrated in an area of southwestern France and northern Spain. And these started becoming found roughly 140 years ago. We're not really sure why they created cave paintings. It could have been for ritualistic rites, ceremonial, or even aesthetic reasons. But we think that there are special meanings to these paintings because they're in hard-to-get-to areas. When we look at the Altamira cave, we can see that there's really no cave paintings up along the entrance to the cave. Everything else is much further back in hard-to-get-to areas. Now, Altamira is special because this is the very first cave painting that was discovered, 1879, and it was found by this man named Don Marcelino Sacchuolo. In 1880, a year after he finds this cave, he publishes a book that announces its discovery, and scholars, unfortunately, they ignored it. They were under the belief that it was a hoax, and it wasn't until 1905, after the death of Sacchuolo, that the authenticity of these paintings were accepted. The Altamira cave contains probably the most recent works to date, meaning that they're dated around 12,500 BC. Most of the cave paintings we'll look at are much older than that. The cave, as you can see by this map, extends quite a distance. It's actually 800 feet deep. In order to get to some of the deeper recesses of the caves in order to paint, we had to go and use these lamps. Now, the lamps themselves, this one in particular is not decorated. However, this one is with an ibex. Now, these would have held moss and animal fat, and the moss would have burned very much like a wick does to a candle. Definitely a low amount of light, but also for a very, very long time. We'll take a look at some of the other images of the Altamira cave. And when you look at these, maybe you can think of some adjectives as how you would describe them. They do rely heavily on outline, on flatness. They're definitely two-dimensional. And for most of us, we could probably create something very, very similar. Now, the Lascaux cave is very, very special. And if you were taking this class back when I was a student, this is really the cave that was concentrated on. It was discovered in 1940 by 4 teenagers when a tree fell over after a storm. And the works date back to roughly 15 to 16,000 BC. It's exciting because there's over 600 paintings and 1,500 engravings on its walls. This is also the home to the very famous Hall of Bulls. The images seen on the walls here tend to be over life size. So here's some of the youths that found the entrance to the cave and the famous Hall of Bulls. The drawing at the upper right-hand corner of this image shows one of the coolest artworks. This is what's called the Great Bull. And the Great Bull is the largest prehistoric painting of an animal ever found. It measures 18 feet diagonally. Now, with Lascaux, Lascaux became a tourist attraction. It opened in 1950, and about 350 people per day would walk through it. By 1960, 1,500 people per day were walking through. And it ended up being closed in 1963. Because of the carbon dioxide we breathe out, it began to erode the paintings. But in order not to lose that tourist trade that was established already, a replica cave was created. And if you go to Lascaux today, you can walk through a replica cave. Among the works that you have in Lascaux is this one here, which is probably, by some scholars' opinions, the very first time we have a drawing of a human. Most of the times in cave paintings we have animals. They're definitely in profile view. But this one here seems to show a man. And not only that, this painting narrative that we have perhaps could even be our first narrative in art history, but it's in an area of the cave that is literally 20 feet down a shaft. So in order to get the artist even down into that area, a ladder had to be constructed, and of course it's just in a very awkward area of the cave. The next cave we're going to look at is Peck Merle. And Peck Merle has a little bit older paintings, 23,000 BC on these. And the most famous work from this cave shows 2 horses. And their forms utilize the natural formation of the rocks. So we're going to take a look at those right here. And you can see, especially with the horse at the right, that we've got the horse's face taking up this natural formation of the rock, which is really cool. And it's also interesting to note the spots on this horse. We don't ever see spots on horses. I mean, I could go with stripes and some bicolors and such, but spots are really interesting. And the main theory that art historians have thought of is that this is some type of accounting measure that we have. Also, you'll notice the handprints. There are 200 handprints in this cave. 190 of those show missing fingers. And they're shown both in positive and negative form. In the top of this rock here, you can kind of see the negative forms where pigment has been placed around the hand. But in other parts of the cave, the handprint is positive, that the handprint had the pigment on it itself. Also, 1,000 footprints were cast out of the floor of this cave, and we find that they're mostly children. Now, the most important cave find is the Shiva Caves. And the Shiva Cave is new to us in art history. It was found in 1994, and it's exciting because it made us totally transform our ideas that we previously had about early man and early cave paintings. So these cave paintings were found by a group of friends. There were three friends that were caving, and they had this little air pocket around these rocks that they found where fresh air was coming in. And so they removed the rocks and stepped into this space, and it was absolutely gigantic. The cave is 1,700 feet deep, with ceilings ranging as high as 100 feet, and there's 4 chambers to this cave as well. They found that it was in a remarkable state of preservation. They actually thought it was a joke at first, that someone had come in recently to do these drawings or paintings. And when they looked at the ground and they saw the calcium deposits, and I'll show you some of those, they knew that no one had visited this cave for a tremendously long time. What's interesting artistically about the Shiva Caves is that they don't rely solely on outlines, that they show modeled or recessive space. And many of the paintings seem to be in perspective. Now, perspective is not something we really talk about in this class. It's something that we talk about in Art 5 because it was invented, or at least codified, put a formula to, in 1426 AD. And here we are about 32,000 years before that. And these people seem to have an idea of what perspective is. And that's what's important, because these artists, now we can say that they share the same level of artistic skill or capability as we do today. And that's why we had to rewrite these chapters in the early art history books, because up until now, our thoughts were that, hey, as man, aged, their artistic skill increased. But that's not the case, especially with this cave find. We'll take a look at a couple other images that we have from the cave as well. This is Michael Shiva at the right. He is the founder of the cave. And you can see the famous images off there to the left. What's exciting about this cave is the tremendous amount of animals and such that have been found. And there's 427 animals drawn in this cave, representing 17 species. The paintings depict animals such as bison and mammoths, bears, deer, hyenas, panthers, owls, goats, and as well as humans and handprints we have as well. One of my favorite works in this cave is the rhinoceros. And to me, this is incredibly cool because this is in southern France. This is the Ardèche mountain chain. And there's no rhinoceros near. Most of these animals are native to Africa and Southeast Asia, such as India. And here we are, literally thousands of miles away, and no other cave in this mountain chain, and there's 27 other caves that have been found, have an image even remotely like this. Here's one of the engravings on the wall. And here is one of the bear skulls. Now, these bear skulls were found exclusive. There were about 30 bear skulls, no bodies. And the founder of this cave, he said this really was what freaked him out about this cave. And again, here is the calcium deposits that were on the floor. This is the reason why we can say that no one had visited this cave in thousands of years. Actually, they found one set of footprints from what they figured was a young girl who went into the cave around 8000 BC, walked around it, and left. That was the only visitor this cave had had between roughly 30,000 BC and until 1994 when it was found. And with that, I'm going to end this portion of the lecture. We'll talk about sculpture and architecture in the next video.